everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going deep on something I think is super relevant to all of us.
Yeah, I think this is something we all deal with.
How news media, especially in our crazy 24/7 news cycle world, can subtly manipulate information and basically shape what we believe. It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is, yeah.
We're basing this deep dive on the manipulation of news media, how agendas shape public perception.
Great source.
Whether you are prepping for a meeting on media bias or you just can't resist a good conspiracy theory, this deep dive is going to give you some serious knowledge.
It's not just about, fake news.
Right.
This is about understanding how even sources that seem really reputable can use tactics to push certain narratives.
Okay, so let's unpack how journalism has shifted from just reporting facts to something a lot more complex.
Yeah.
Our source material points to a bunch of factors, but one that really stood out to me was this idea of corporate ownership.
Yeah.
So think about it. Huge companies own a lot of news outlets these days, and these companies have their own agendas, their own financial interests, which can absolutely influence what stories get covered and how they're presented.
Totally. Think about it like this.
Okay.
If you own a restaurant, you're probably not going to serve food that people don't like, or that's going to make them sick.
Right.
You want to promote the things that benefit you.
Right. And it's the same with these companies. They're going to promote the news that benefits them in some way.
Exactly. The source actually goes into a case
Oh, really?
of a major media conglomerate that kind of downplayed a story about one of its own subsidiaries polluting a local water supply.
Oh, wow.
And the coverage focused more on the economic benefits the subsidiary brought to the area
Yeah.
rather than the environmental damage.
So it's like they're subtly trying to protect their own interests while pretending to report the news objectively.
Right. And that's just one example of how corporate ownership can really affect the news we consume.
Okay, so we've got huge corporations pulling strings behind the scenes. What else should we be aware of?
Well, there's the whole political alignment issue.
Right.
It's not really a secret that most outlets lean either left or right, and that definitely colors their reporting.
Yeah, it's almost like they're speaking different languages sometimes.
It's true.
But how does this actually play out in the news we read and watch?
It affects everything.
Yeah.
The way they frame the news, the experts they choose to interview, even the specific words they use.
Okay.
Take a story about, let's say, a proposed government spending bill. A left-leaning outlet might call it an investment in social programs, but a right-leaning outlet might call it a reckless spending spree.
Oh, wow.
Same bill, but totally different spin.
It's crazy how a few words can completely change the way we perceive something. It's like that saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the source material argues that this kind of subtle framing can be just as effective as outright bias in shaping public opinion.
It's like they're planting seeds in our minds without us even realizing it.
Exactly. And another powerful tool they have is sensationalism. Think clickbait headlines.
Oh, yeah.
Dramatic music, and those over-the-top graphics.
Yeah.
It's all designed to grab our attention, even if it means sacrificing accuracy or context.
Oh, totally. I've fallen for those clickbait headlines so many times. It's like scientists discover cure for baldness.
Right.
And then you click through and it's just some study about mice that might lead to a treatment someday.
Exactly. And by then, the damage is done. You've already absorbed that initial impression, even if it's totally misleading.
It's like that first bite of a cake that looks amazing but turns out to be totally dry and tasteless.
Perfect analogy.
Thanks.
And this constant bombardment of sensationalized news can also lead to something our source calls emotional exhaustion. We become so used to the drama and outrage that we start to tune it out altogether.
Yeah.
Which is dangerous because it can make us apathetic to real issues that deserve our attention.
It's like our brains are on overdrive all the time trying to process all this information, and eventually we just shut down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that can make us more susceptible to manipulation because we're not engaging critically with the information we're consuming.
So we've got corporate interests, political bias, and sensationalism all contributing to this shift from news to narrative. Is there anything else we should be wary of?
Yeah, there's this concept of echo chambers, which is where we tend to gravitate towards news that confirms our existing beliefs and surround ourselves with people who think the same way.
Yeah, I know I'm guilty of this. It's so easy to just stick with the news sources and social media groups that reinforce my own views. But why is this such a problem?
Right. The source explains that when we only hear one side of the story, we miss out on crucial information and perspectives.
Okay.
It's like only eating one type of food all the time.
Right.
You might enjoy it, but you're missing out on essential nutrients.
So how do we break out of these echo chambers? Should we force ourselves to watch news channels we disagree with?
I don't think it's about forcing yourself to consume content you hate.
Okay.
It's about actively seeking out diverse perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that means reading an article from a publication that leans in the opposite political direction, or following a few social media accounts that challenge your own views.
Okay.
It can be uncomfortable at first,
Yeah.
but it's essential for developing a more nuanced and informed understanding of the world.
That's great advice. It's like trying a new cuisine you've never had before.
Yeah,
You might discover a new favorite dish.
exactly.
Yeah.
And by exposing ourselves to different perspectives, we can become more critical thinkers and less susceptible to manipulation.
This is all really eye-opening. But we can't forget about the elephant in the room, social media. How does it fit into this whole manipulation game?
Oh yeah, social media is a whole other beast.
Right.
It amplifies everything we've talked about.
Yeah.
You know, corporate influence, political bias, sensationalism, and throws in a few unique challenges of its own.
Like what? Spill the tea?
Well, for starters, social media algorithms prioritize engagement.
Okay.
That means they show us content that's likely to get us clicking, liking, and sharing, regardless of whether it's true or not.
So the more outrageous and emotionally charged something is, the more likely it is to go viral, even if it's complete nonsense.
Exactly.
Wow.
And because social media moves so fast, it's incredibly difficult to keep up with the spread of misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
By the time a fact check comes out, the false story has already been shared thousands of times.
It's like trying to catch a runaway train.
Perfect analogy.
I like that one.
And this rapid spread of misinformation can have serious consequences, which the source dives into in detail.
Okay.
It can erode trust in institutions, fuel political and social division, and even incite violence in the real world.
Okay, that sounds pretty scary.
It is, yeah.
We definitely need to talk more about that. But first, I'm dying to know how they actually pull this off.
Yeah.
What specific tactics do they use to distort the truth?
So you want to know how they twist the truth? We're ready, because the source breaks down some seriously sneaky tactics they use, and I bet you've encountered a lot of these without even realizing it.
Yeah, hit me with it. I'm ready to become a master media detective.
First up, you have selective reporting, or cherry picking as it's often called. Imagine baking a cake, but only using the sugar.
Uh-huh.
Sweet, but definitely not a cake. This tactic is all about choosing facts that support the narrative while conveniently ignoring anything that doesn't fit.
Okay, so they're basically presenting a half-baked truth, leading us to draw conclusions based on incomplete information.
Exactly. And it's particularly effective with complex issues where it's easy to omit crucial context.
Okay.
The source actually mentions a recent example
Yeah.
where a news outlet reported a huge spike in crime rates.
Oh, wow.
Sounds scary, right?
Yeah.
But they failed to mention that the area's population had doubled in the same period, making the increase proportionally much smaller.
Yeah. Oh, so they're using real data but twisting it to create a more sensational story. What else do they do?
Another tactic that's super effective is framing and word choice.
Okay.
The same event can be perceived in totally different ways, just depending on the language used to describe it.
Yeah, words have power.
They do.
Like if you call someone thrifty versus cheap, it changes the whole perception, right?
Exactly. Our source gives a really stark example.
Okay.
2 headlines about the same protest. One read, "Protesters clash with police," while the other one read, "Citizens demand justice." Same event, vastly different feeling, right?
Totally. One sounds like a chaotic riot, while the other suggests a peaceful demonstration for a worthy cause.
Exactly.
It's mind-blowing how much impact a few carefully chosen words can have.
That's why it's so important to pay attention to the language used in news reporting. Is it inflammatory? Is it neutral? Is it designed to evoke a specific emotional response? These are all questions you need to ask yourself as you consume news.
Okay, noted. I'm going to start paying way closer attention to the word choices they use. What else should we be on the lookout for?
Well, closely related to framing is the tactic of omitting context.
Okay.
It's like giving you a puzzle piece, but without the rest of the picture. Sure, it's a piece of the truth, but it's meaningless without the full context.
I see. So even a factual statement can be misleading if it's presented without the necessary background information.
Exactly. The source actually highlights this example where a news article claimed that a certain politician had voted against funding for education.
Oh, wow.
This sounds bad, right?
Yeah.
But what they failed to mention was that the politician had actually proposed an alternative funding plan that they believed was more effective.
Oh, okay.
Without that context, readers were left with this negative impression that wasn't entirely accurate.
Wow, that's so sneaky. They're relying on us not to dig deeper and find the full story.
And unfortunately, that's often the case. But you, as a savvy consumer of information, can combat this by always asking yourself, what's missing from this story? What else do I need to know to get the full picture?
Got it. Context is key. But what about those experts they always quote?
Right.
Sometimes it feels like they're just pulling random people off the street to support their narrative.
Oh, yeah. The mysterious experts and anonymous sources.
Yeah.
Our source dives into this tactic, explaining how it can be used to lend credibility to a story while obscuring the true motives or biases of those involved.
So it's like they're saying, trust us, this is legit, but we can't tell you why. It always makes me so suspicious.
As you should be. The source mentions this case,
Okay.
where a news outlet quoted an expert
Okay.
who claimed that a certain dietary supplement could cure cancer.
Oh my gosh.
Sounds amazing, right?
Yeah.
But when they dug deeper, they discovered that the expert was actually a paid spokesperson for the supplement company and had no real scientific credentials.
Wow, that's messed up. They're preying on people's hopes and fears to sell a product.
And sadly, it happens all the time. That's why it's crucial to consider the source. Who are these experts? What are their qualifications? Do they have any potential conflicts of interest? These are all questions you should be asking.
Totally. I'm starting to feel like a real detective uncovering all these hidden agendas. What other tricks do they have up their sleeve?
Well, one that's incredibly common, especially online, is the mismatch between headlines and content. You know, those clickbait headlines that promise the world but then deliver something totally different.
Oh, yeah, like those headlines that scream, you won't believe what happened next. And then you click through and it's just a boring article about a minor traffic accident.
Exactly. The source argues that this tactic is designed to exploit our curiosity and emotional triggers to drive traffic to their websites. It's all about those clicks and page views, even if it means sacrificing accuracy or relevance.
So they're sacrificing quality for quantity. It's like that fast food burger that looks delicious in the ads but ends up being a soggy disappointment.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And it's not just about disappointment. This tactic can also lead us to form inaccurate opinions based on those misleading headlines, even if we never read the actual article.
Yeah, because who has time to read everything they click on? We're bombarded with information all day long. But okay, so we've got to be wary of clickbait headlines. What else?
Another sneaky tactic is false equivalence,
Okay.
where they present two sides of an argument as equally valid, even when one is clearly supported by more evidence or logic.
So it's like saying that believing the Earth is flat is just as valid as believing it's round.
Exactly.
Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but that doesn't mean all opinions are equally factual.
Right. The source uses the climate change debate as like a classic example of this. Giving equal airtime to climate change deniers alongside scientists who have overwhelming evidence supporting human-caused climate change creates a false sense of balance and can really mislead the public.
It's like having a serious discussion about the dangers of smoking with someone who insists that cigarettes are actually good for you. You're not going to get anywhere.
Exactly. And finally, we have the power of repetition.
Okay.
You know how if you hear something enough times, you start to believe it, even if it's not true?
Totally. It's like that song you hated at first, but then it got stuck in your head and now you secretly love it. Repetition can be so persuasive.
It is.
The source talks about this, right?
They do. They highlight how this tactic is often used in political campaigns and advertising to instill certain ideas or associations in our minds. Repeat a message often enough, and it starts to feel familiar and true, even if there's no evidence to support it.
It's like brainwashing, or maybe more like subliminal messaging.
Yeah.
They're planting these ideas in our subconscious without us even realizing it.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of this tactic. Don't just passively absorb the information you're being fed. Question everything. Do your own research. And don't be afraid to challenge the narratives that are being presented to you.
This is all incredibly insightful, but it's also a bit overwhelming. It feels like we have to be constantly on guard, scrutinizing every piece of information we encounter. Is there any way to make this process a little easier?
Absolutely. The good news is there are strategies you can use to become a more discerning consumer of news and information. It's like developing a superpower.
Ooh, I like that.
And our source provides some really excellent tips for doing just that.
Okay, so we've covered that shift from news to narrative and all those sneaky manipulation tactics. But now for the million-dollar question, how do we actually fight back? How do we become those savvy media detectives you mentioned?
Well, the good news is you don't need a magnifying glass or a secret decoder ring.
Okay, good.
Our source gives us a bunch of practical strategies that anyone can use.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the tools to fight back against the spin.
All right, first and foremost, diversify your sources. Don't just rely on one news outlet or social media feed for your information.
Okay.
It's like getting fashion advice from only one friend. They might have great taste, but wouldn't you want a second opinion?
Yeah, that's true. But how many sources is enough? And how do we even find sources that we can actually trust?
Well, there's no magic number, but the source suggests aiming for a mix of perspectives.
Okay.
Try reading news from outlets that lean in different political directions.
Oh, okay.
It might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but it's crucial for breaking out of those echo chambers and getting a more well-rounded view of the issue. And look for sources that have a good reputation for accuracy and fact-checking.
Okay.
There are actually websites that rate the bias and reliability of different news outlets,
Oh, cool.
which can be really helpful.
That's good to know. So
Right.
mix it up and check those credentials. What else?
Whenever possible, go straight to the primary source.
Okay.
Don't just rely on someone else's interpretation of the information.
Right.
It's like hearing about a movie from a friend versus watching it yourself. You might get a totally different experience.
So if I read an article about a scientific study, I should try to find the original study itself, rather than just taking the journalist's word for it.
Exactly. You'll be able to see the data firsthand, understand the methodology,
Yeah.
and draw your own conclusions. Plus, you might catch some nuances or details that weren't even included in the news article.
This is starting to feel really empowering. I love the idea of going straight to the source and cutting out the middleman.
Yeah.
What else can we do to become better media detectives?
Pay super close attention to the language that's being used.
Okay.
This is where you can really start to dissect how media tries to influence your emotions and opinions.
Oh, I love this. It's like learning a secret code that allows you to see through the manipulation.
Exactly. Watch out for emotionally charged language. Ask yourself why certain words are being used. Are they an accurate reflection of what happened? Or are they meant to evoke a specific reaction?
So if a headline screams, "Politician launches vicious attack on opponent," I should be a little skeptical. Maybe it wasn't so vicious after all.
Right. It could have been a perfectly civil disagreement that's been blown out of proportion for dramatic effect. The source actually even suggests a fun little exercise. Try rewriting a headline using more neutral language.
Okay.
You'll be amazed at how much the tone and perception can change.
That's a great idea. I'm going to try that. It's like I'm taking back control of the narrative.
Yeah.
What else can we do to arm ourselves against misinformation?
Well, technology can be our friend here. Fact-checking websites are an invaluable resource.
Oh, yeah.
They can help you quickly verify the accuracy of a claim or story. Think of them as the mythbusters of the internet.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of sites like Snopes and PolitiFact. Are those the kind of thing you're talking about?
Exactly. They do the heavy lifting for you, researching claims and providing evidence-based analysis. And a lot of them allow you to search for specific topics or keywords, so you can easily check the facts on something you've seen online.
That's awesome. I'm adding those to my bookmarks right now. But what about social media? It feels like that's where a lot of this misinformation spreads.
You're absolutely right. Social media is like a breeding ground for fake news. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself.
Okay.
Remember, algorithms prioritize engagement, so be wary of content that's designed to trigger strong emotional reactions. Outrage, fear, excitement.
Right.
It might be designed to go viral, not to actually inform.
So just because something is trending doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
Got it. But how can you tell if something is legit or not? It's not always obvious.
Here are a few red flags to watch for.
No.
Check the source of the information. Is it a reputable news organization, or is it some random account with no clear credentials? Look for spelling errors or grammatical mistakes. Those can be signs of a hastily created fake news story. And be wary of content that's designed to just confirm your existing biases.
Right.
If it seems too good to be true, or if it perfectly reinforces your worldview without any nuance, it might be worth double checking.
It's like they say if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And speaking of things that sound too good to be true, what about those promises of easy money or miracle cures?
Oh yeah, those are classic red flags. Always be skeptical of any claims that seem too good to be true, especially if they're pushing a product or service.
Okay, so be wary of emotional triggers, check the source, watch for typos, and don't believe everything you see. Anything else we should keep in mind when we're scrolling through social media?
Don't be afraid to be a skeptic. It's okay to question what you see online. You can even leave a comment asking for sources or pointing out inconsistencies. And if you're really unsure about something, don't share it. It's better to be safe than sorry. You don't want to contribute to the spread of misinformation.
That's a good point. We all have a responsibility to be mindful of what we share online. It's like with great power comes great responsibility, right? But seriously, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of sharing something shocking or funny, but we need to take a moment to consider the source and the potential consequences.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't about becoming cynical or distrusting of all media. There are still plenty of reliable, trustworthy sources out there. It's about developing the tools and the skills to discern fact from fiction and to make informed decisions based on evidence, not hype.
This has been a seriously eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about how to navigate this crazy media landscape. But if you had to leave our listener with one final piece of advice, what would it be?
Think about this. What's one piece of news you've accepted as fact without really questioning it? Now that you know these tactics, go back and look at it with a critical eye. What are the sources? Is there any potential bias? Are there any missing pieces of the puzzle?
That's such a powerful challenge. It's so easy to get caught up in the headlines and the drama, but we need to remember to step back and engage critically with the information we're consuming. It's not always easy, but it's so important.
We're all bombarded with information all day long,
Yeah.
but we have the power to choose what we believe. By being aware of these manipulation tactics, we can reclaim that power and become more informed, more engaged citizens.
Well said. It's been an absolute pleasure diving into this topic with you. I feel like I've leveled up my media literacy skills, and I hope our listeners have too.
It's been my pleasure as well. Remember, staying informed is an ongoing process. Stay curious, keep asking questions, and never stop learning.
Until next time, stay sharp, folks. And don't forget your detective hats.